Good morning, good morning. Welcome back. Welcome back to our Samuel study. And today we're in chapter 25. So this one will take me a couple of days. So we're going to start off with the first 22 verses. And so let's start with a prayer. Dear Heavenly Father, oh Lord, we love you so much. And thank you, Lord, for your word and all the things that we can learn from your word. Help us today to see what it is we can glean from this passage to help us in our daily lives. We give you praise and thanks in all you do. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen. Oh, this is a fascinating story. It's one of the ones, one of the reasons I wanted to study 1st and 2nd Samuel. Is we're starting to get into some of the interesting stories that David surrounded David that marks the time before he became king. And this is an interesting one. David is going to meet this couple named Nabal and Abigail. And I tell you, interesting couple because Nabal is kind of like big on himself, way too much pride. And Abigail is just got a servant heart. And David is going to witness that. We'll see that more next week when we get back we'll see what Abigail does along with David. But first off, Samuel himself is going to pass away. And so that's the first verse, and then we get into this meeting between Nabal and Abigail and David. Okay, so let's get some verses in here, and I just bring up a map of the stuff we're going to be talking about today. So let's begin in verse 1 here. Verse 1 is the only one that talks about Samuel's death. So we just got a few verses to add to that. I won't get deep into Samuel's life. We've been studying him all along. But it's going to cause things to kind of go into motion too. David's going to depart the area for a while, and we're going to see this story about Nabal and Abigail and how David gets involved with him. So, and Samuel died, and all Israelites were gathered together and lamented him and buried him in his house at Ramah. And David arose and went down to the wilderness of Paran. That's why I got this first map. The wilderness of Paran is way down here. Not sure why David went down there, because up here is where Ramah is. That's where they buried Samuel. And for some reason, I remember when we left off yesterday, David was on the Dead Sea. He was at LGDI. And for some reason, I guess when he heard it, at first he wanted to get away from Saul at that point, but Saul had gone home. So that when he heard that Samuel died, it sounds like he went up to mourn Samuel. And then he left there and he came down to this wilderness Paran. But he's going to come back up here in the next verse and come up to this area here in the middle, which is where Nabal is. And he actually does some work with some of Nabal's people. Nabal is rich. Okay, but first David. David arose and went down to the wilderness of Paran. I'll get some verses on this in Deuteronomy 34:8. And the children of Israel wept for Moses in the plain of Moab 30 days. So the days of weeping and mourning for Moses were ended, so that the same thing would have happened for Samuel, showing that typically the mourning period is about 30 days. Also 1 Samuel 7:17. And his return was to Ramah, for there was his house, and there he judged Israel, and there he built an altar unto the Lord. Samuel spent all of his time around Ramah. That was his home base. And 1 Samuel 15:35, still talking about Samuel. And Samuel came no more to see Saul until the day of his death. Nevertheless, Samuel mourned for Saul, and the Lord repented that he had made Saul king over Israel. So at this point, Samuel has passed away, and the way Samuel is going to see Saul again is kind of interesting. We'll get into that here in a couple of chapters. But God's going to allow his spirit to come back very briefly. And we're going to see that in here. So I think that this verse here is talking about more of a prophecy that Samuel will see Saul again. the day that Saul dies. So we're going to see that here in a minute. And again, in a couple of weeks, next couple of weeks, I forget which chapter it is. Now Samuel was dead, and all of Israel had lamented him and buried him in Ramah, even in his own city. And Saul had put away those that had familiar spirits and the wizards out of the land. It's chapter 28 is where we're going to get into this. So this is where we're going to see this strange thing happen between Saul, this woman with familiar spirits known as I think of her name, you'll recognize her as I say it, because she was famous. Whenever I heard the term it brings up the idea of women that think that they can foresee the future. What do they call it? No, I can't find it in the verses. I'll find it here. Now it's driving me crazy. Endor, spirit at Endor, the women at Endor. So we'll get into that, chapter 28. But Saul was king, but Samuel had been the nation's spiritual leader. Throughout his whole life, Samuel was careful to listen to God very closely. He was very in tune with God. We saw that in 1 Samuel 3:10. The Lord came and stood and called as at other times, Samuel, Samuel. And Samuel answered, Speak, for thy servant heareth. Also in 9:14. And they went up into the city, and when they were come into the city, behold, Samuel came out against them for to go up to the high place. Now the Lord had told Samuel in his ear a day before Saul came, saying, Tomorrow about this time I will send thee a man out of the land of Benjamin, and they shall anoint him to be captain over his people. That's the day that Samuel anointed Saul, that he may save my people out of the hand of the Philistines. For I have looked upon my people, because their cry has come unto me. And when Samuel saw Saul, the Lord said unto him, Behold, the man which I spoke of thee of, this same shall you reign over my people. So Saul did originally at first become very in tune with God, and Samuel anointed him. Saul let it get to his head. And that's what we've been studying all through, so that no longer is Saul looking to God for answers. And so Samuel was a good, obedient servant, as we see also in 3:21. And the Lord appeared again to Shiloh, for the Lord revealed himself to Samuel in Shiloh by the word of the Lord. Also in 10:1. And Samuel took a vial of oil and poured it upon his head and kissed him and said, It is not because the Lord hath anointed thee to be captain over his inheritance. That's when David got anointed to be king next. So with Samuel gone, Israel would be without the spiritual leadership until David became king. So we'll see that coming up here in the next few chapters. Actually, chapter 28, when Saul dies. Okay, so that's what we got for David. For Samuel. And now we move into this strange little interesting meeting between David, Nabal, and Abigail. So let's get into this part here. Okay, I'm going to read 2 through 11, and then we'll talk about it. And there was a man in Maon. Now that's up in this area. I got a different map. I guess it'll blow up a little bit more. So it's in this general area here. There was a man in Maon whose possessions were in Carmel, and the man was very great. So Carmel is right there. So Moan and Carmel. And he had 3,000 sheep, 1,000 goats, and he was shearing his sheep in Carmel. Now the name of the man was Nabal, and the name of his wife was Abigail. And she was a woman of good understanding and of a beautiful countenance. But the man was churlish and evil in his doings, and he was of the house of Caleb. And David heard in the wilderness that Nabal did shear his sheep. And David sent out 10 young men, and David said unto the young men, Get you up to Carmel, and go to Nabal, and greet him in my name. And thus shall you say to him that liveth in prosperity, Peace be both to thee, and peace be to thine house, and peace be unto all that thou hast. And now I have heard that thou hast shearers. Now thy sheep, the shepherds which were with us, we hurt them not, neither was there aught missing unto them, all the while they were in Carmel. And the young men and they will show thee. Wherefore let the young man find favor in thine eyes, for we come in a good day. Give, I pray thee, whatsoever cometh to thine hand unto thy servant and to thy son David. And when David's young men came, they spoke to Nabal according to all the words in the name of David, and ceased. And Nabal answered David's servants and said, Who is David, and who is the son of Jesse, that be my servants nowadays, that break away every man from his master? Shall I then take my bread and my water and my flesh that I have killed for my shearers, and give it unto men whom I know not whence they be? Okay, so Nabal rudely refuses David's request to feed his 600 men. If we sympathize with Nabal, it's because our customs are so different today from those practiced at the time of this story. First, in David's time, simple hospitality demands that travelers, any number of them, be fed. Nabal was very rich and could have easily afforded to meet David's request. Second, David wasn't asking for a handout. He and his men had been protecting Nabal's workers, and the part of Nabal's prosperity was due to David's vigilance. We should be generous with those who look out for us and help us, even if we are not obligated to do so by law or by custom. So the name of this man was Nabal. This is another indication of his character, because the name Nabal actually means fool. In ancient times, names were often connected with a person's character. We don't know if Nabal was given this name or he earned it, but he certainly lived up to it. The fact that he was of the house of Caleb may also be a bad description of Nabal, because Caleb means dog, and to be of the house of a dog was no compliment. As the word Caleb signifies a dog, the Septuagint have understood it as implying a man of canine disposition, and translated thus: he was a doggish man. He is understood in the same way by the Syriac and the Arabic. That was by a theologian, Clark, comment. Now for Abigail. Abigail, a woman of good understanding and beautiful appearance. Nabal's wife was both beautiful and wise. In contrast to Nabal himself, the Bible gives Abigail great praise when it says that she was of beautiful appearance, because the only other woman who have this Hebrew phrase attached to their name was Rachel, back in Genesis 29:17. Let me get that real quick. I forgot to put it in here. Genesis 29:17. Leah was tender, but Rachel was beautiful and well-favored. And Esther also was given this title. We see that in Esther 2:7. What a neat story, Esther 2:7. And he brought up Hedisheth, that is Esther, his uncle's daughter, for she had neither father nor mother, and the maid was fair and beautiful, whom Mordecai, when her father and mother were dead, took for his own daughter. But we're going to find out that she had a very strong character also. That's what we're going to see next. It's also in verse 2. There was a man of Moab whose possessions were in Carmel, and the man was very great, and he had 3,000 sheep and 1,000 goats, and he was shearing his goats and sheep in Carmel. I want to look at this again from Joshua 15:55. Seem to have missed a whole page. Joshua 15:55. I'm not sure why I put that in there. Just that this particular area was given to, this whole area was given to let's never mind that verse. Continuing on, verse 3. There was a man, Maon, whose possessions were in Carmel, and the man was very great, and he had 3,000 sheep and 1,000 goats, and he was shearing his sheep in Carmel. I'm going again to Joshua 15:13. Something is messed up here in my verses. Joshua 15:13. Oh, okay, so it's talking about Caleb. And unto Caleb the son of Jehun he gave a part among the children of Judah, according to the commandment of the Lord to Joshua, even the city of Abba the father of Anak, which is, the city is Hebron. Okay, these verses are describing the fact that this man, Nabal, was of the same family as Cabal. And so Cabal had this general area of Carmel, Maon, Ziph. This area was given to him way back in Joshua. So that's where that comes in. Okay, now I understand. Also, 1 Samuel 30:14. We made an invasion upon the south of Cherites, and upon the coast which belongeth to Judah, and upon the south of Caleb, and we burned Ziklag with fire. So again, talking about this man, Caleb. Remember, Caleb was actually Joshua's second in command, and he was given this choice area. So these verses are referencing that fact. Okay, continuing on, reading verses 4 through 9. David asked for compensation for his valuable service to Nabal. So some things to contemplate here is, please give whatever comes to your hand to your servants and your son David. And David made this request because he performed a valuable service for Nabal, protecting his flocks while the Philistine raids were common. To our modern ears, it might sound like David ran some kind of a protection racket, but that wasn't the case at all. He performed a worthy, valuable service for Nabal, and he expected to be compensated. So Nabal was shearing his sheep. This means that David waited until the right time to ask for compensation for his services. David's protected Nabal's shepherds and flocks a long time, but did not expect to be compensated until Nabal himself made his money at the harvest of the sheep shearing. And we saw that David sent 10 young men. This shows that David made the request politely. He did it through messengers so Nabal would not be intimidated. He sent the messengers with a greeting full of warmth and kindness, peace be unto you, so Nabal would not give out of fear of intimidation. And he also pointed out that your shepherds were with us, nor was there anything missing. Ask your young man and they will tell you. This shows that David made the request properly, carefully, and patiently, giving Nabal an itemized receipt for services rendered. When we come on a feast day, David politely reminded Nabal of the traditions of generous surrounding harvest and sheep shearing. Please give whatever comes to your hand. David did not demand any specific payment for Nabal or set a price. He simply left it up to Nabal's generosity. And then David's messengers simply waited for the reply. Okay, coming to verse 6. And thus shall you say to him that liveth in prosperity, peace be unto you, and peace be to thine house, and peace be in all that is said. Go into 1 Chronicles 12:18. And Joash, king of Judea, took all the hallowed things that Jehoshaphat and Jehoram and Azariah, his fathers, kings of Judah, had dedicated in his own hallowed things, and all the gold that was found in the treasure of the house of the Lord, and in the king's house, and he sent it to Hazael, king of Syria, and he went away from Jerusalem. This is another example of, except I clicked on the first, reading the wrong verse, 1 Chronicles 12:18. Try that again. Then the Spirit came upon Amaziah, who was chief of the captains, and he said, There are we, David, and on thy side, thy son of Jesse. Peace, peace be unto you, and peace be unto thine helpers, for the God helpeth thee. Then David received them and made him captains of the band. Okay, moving on to verses 10 through 12. Nabal answered David's servant and said, Who is David, and who is the son of Jesse that might be my servants nowadays, that break away every man from his master? Shall I then take my bread and my water and my flesh that I have killed from my shearers, and give it unto the men whom I have known whence they be? So this is Nabal's reply to David's request, adding in verse 12. So David's young men turned their way, and he went again and came and told all those sayings. So who is David, and who is the son of Jesse? He commented. It can't be that Nabal did not know who David was, because David was famous throughout all Israel, as we see mentioned in 1 Samuel 18:5 through 7. And David went out whatsoever Saul sent him, and behaved himself wisely. And Saul sent over him the men of war, and he was accepted in the sight of all people, and also in the sight of Saul's servants. And it came to pass as they came, when David was returned from the slaughter of the Philistines, that the women came out of all the cities of Israel, singing and dancing, to meet King Saul with tabrets, with joy, and with instruments of music. And the women answered one another as they played, and said, Saul hath slain his thousands, and David his 10,000s. So Nabal said that this as a direct insult to David, knowing who he was but refusing to recognize him. In our modern way of speaking, Nabal said, Who does he think he is? There are many servants nowadays who break away each one from his master. Nabal deepened his insult, saying that David is simply a rebellious servant. This was completely false, because David had continually, though not perfectly, conducted himself wisely when attacked by Saul. And then he commented, and then the part that says, Shall I take my bread, my water, my meat, and my shearers, and give it to you? Nabal showed that what an ungenerous man he was. He looked at everything as his instead of the Lord's. True and biblical generosity doesn't think, This is mine, and I will share it with you. It thinks, all that I have belongs to the Lord, so you can have some of it also. I want to thank David Guzek for some of these comments, because I found a very interesting insight he had into this passage. Okay, on to verse 10. And Nabal answered David's servants and said, Who is David, and who is the son of Jesse, that be my servants nowadays, that break away every man from his master? I want to add in Judges 9:28 to this. And Gael, the son of Ebed, said, Who is Abimelech, and who is Shechem, that we should serve him? Another time that somebody is being similar. Is not he the son of Jerubbaal, and Zebel his officer? Serve the man of Hamor and the father of Shechem. But why should we serve them? Just another example of pride in action. When you think so highly of yourself that you're not humble with other people. Okay, on to verse 13. And David said unto his men, Gird you up on every man his sword. And they girded on every man his sword, and David also girded on his sword. And they went up after David, about 400 men, and 200 abode by the stuff. So 200 stayed behind to continue protecting the sheep, and 400 are going to talk to Nabal. So David reacts to Nabal's insulting response, and then David said to his men, Every man gird on his sword. And David received Nabal's response exactly the way Nabal intended it to be received, with great insult. But Nabal is not dealing with a weak, no-account man. David was a great soldier and warrior. This is actually not a high moment for David. He doesn't respond the way the Lord would have had him respond to an insult, or even to an attack. God would have us bear insults with love and kindness, returning the evil with good. It actually confuses people when you do that. This is a high ground to walk on, but as commented by Jesus, whoever slaps you on the right cheek, turn it to the other side also. That's kind of what Jesus was saying when he said that in Matthew I missed a lot of verses today. Matthew 5, 38 and 39. You have heard that it hath been said, an eye for an eye, or a tooth for a tooth. This is Jesus speaking again. But I say unto you that ye resist not evil, but whosoever shall smite thee on the right cheek, turn to him the other. In other words, try to overstate. Killing them with kindness is the term I've heard before. So David didn't show Nabal the same kindness and long-suffering that he showed to Saul, actually. In just the previous chapter, David spared Saul's life, and Saul not only insulted David, but also attacked him and tried to kill him. So David was able to be kind and long-suffering to Saul, mainly because he was king, but it seemed to have been harder to do towards someone he perceived as his equal or lower than himself. Often this is true measure of our character, not how we treat our superiors, but how we treat our equals or those beneath us in some way or another. So about 400 men went with David. David is not coming to Nabal just to make a statement, but to wipe him out. We see this mentioned also in 1 Samuel 23:13. Then David and his men, which were about 600, arose and departed out of Keilah, and went whatsoever they could go. And it was told Saul that David was escaped from Keilah, and he forbade to go forth. So we know that he had these men, these 600 men around him. They're all kind of like misfits that kind of attached themselves to David. Okay, now we move into the last part of this, in verses 14 through 17. But one of the young men told Abigail. Now Abigail comes in the scene, Nabal's wife, saying, Behold, David sent messengers out of the wilderness to salute our master, and he railed on them. But the men were very good to us, and we were not hurt, neither missed we anything, as long as we were conversant with them. They were when we were in the fields. There were a wall unto us both for night and day, and all the while we were with them keeping the sheep. So they were protecting them, and the men that worked for Abigail and Nabal knew that they were very helpful in protecting them. Verse 17. Now therefore know and consider what thou wilt do. For evil is determined against our master, and against all his household. For he is such a son of Belial. That means that when you see that term, son of Belial, it's basically saying he's one of Satan's men, more or less. That a man cannot speak to him. So Abigail hears how Nabal responded to David. He railed on him. One of the servants who witnessed Nabal's response to David's men tells Nabal's wife, Abigail, that Nabal reviled David's men, and by extension David. To revile means to treat with contemptuous language. The men were very good to us, Nabal's servants told Abigail, of the valuable service David's men performed. Abigail then knew that David and his men deserved compensation. So always know and consider what you will do, for harm is determined. Nabal's servants read the handwriting on the wall. They knew that David would not take such an insult, theft actually, because he was actually performing a function and protecting them, and here they weren't being compensated. Lying down. For their own sake and for the sake of the household, they asked Abigail to do something. Consider what you will do. In other words, consider what you do. That was in the verse. He is such a scoundrel that one cannot speak to him. This explains why they did not appeal directly to Nabal. Actually, the book of Proverbs had not been written yet, but they still knew the truth of it. As you see in this Proverbs 17:12. Let a bear robbed of her whelps meet a man rather than a fool in his folly. In other words, if a mother bear that loses her whelps, watch out for that guy, because he is going to get destroyed by the bear. Rather than a fool in his folly. So it's basically saying Nabal is a fool. So let a man meet a bear. So therefore they made this life and death appeal to Abigail. Okay, on to verse 15. But the men were very good unto us, and we were not hurt, neither missed we anything, as long as we were conversant with them when we were in the fields. Verse on this, 1 Samuel 25:7. And now I have heard that thou hast shearers Now thy shepherds which were with us, we hurt them not, neither was there any there weren't any missing sheep, and in the while they were in Carmel. So David did a really good job in protecting them. Okay, on to verse 16. They were a wall unto us both night and day, so that David's men were actually protecting them solid, like a wall. All the while we were with them, keeping the sheep. Go to Exodus 14:22 to help explain this one. And the children of Israel went into the midst of the sea upon the dry ground, and the waters were a wall unto them on the right hand and on the left. Same basic idea. Even though God was doing the wall of water, it was the same basic protection. They were being protected from the water, and David was that wall between protecting the sheep. Okay, so we're going to look at verses 18 through 20 next. It talks about Abigail. And Abigail made haste and took 200 loaves, 2 bottles of wine, and 5 sheep ready dressed, and 5 measures of parched corn, 100 clusters of raisins, 200 cakes of figs, and laid them on asses. Look at all that food. That's a lot of food to get on a moment's notice. Verse 19. And she said unto her servants, Go on before me, behold, I come after you. But she told not her husband Nabal. Verse 20. And it was so, as she rode on the ass, that she came down by the culvert of the hill, and behold, David and his men came down against her, and she met them. Abigail prepares a present for David and his men. And it says that Abigail made haste, since she was a woman of good understanding. We actually heard about this way back in verse 3. Now the name of the man was Nabal, and the name of his wife Abigail, and she was a woman of good understanding. So she knew that time was of the essence and something had to be done quickly, or her husband was going to be killed. The fact that Abigail was able to gather so much food so quickly shows how wealthy Nabal was too. If this much food was on hand, it makes Nabal's ungenerous reply to David all the worse. Okay, looking at verse 18. So Abigail made haste, 200 loaves and 2 bottles of wine, and so on and so on. Look at 2 Samuel 16:1 to dig a little deeper on this one. And when David was a little past the top of the hill, behold, Ziba, the servant of the Mephibosheth, met him with a couple of asses saddled, and upon them 200 loaves of bread, and 100 bunches of raisins, 100 summer fruits, and a bottle of wine. A similar thing was done with David when he was king. That's what we're looking at here. And moreover, they were nigh them, even under Issachar and Zebulun and Naphtali, brought bread on asses and on camels and on mules and on oxen and meal, cakes of figs and bunches of raisins and wine and oil and oxen and sheep abundantly, for there was joy in Israel. So again, this was a common practice of this time frame. That when somebody's done something good for you, you basically feed them, particularly if you had the means. Okay, verse 19. And she said unto her servants, Go on before me, behold, I will come after you. But she told not her husband Nabal. Interesting, we see a similar situation in Genesis 32:16. He delivered them into the hand of his servants, every drove of themselves, and said unto his servants, Pass over before me, but put a space between drove and drove. Jump into verse 20. And say ye moreover, Behold, thy servant Jacob is behind us. But he said, I will appease him with a present that goeth before me, and afterward I will see his face. Peradventure he will accept of me. That was when Jacob was going to meet his brother Esau, and he actually sent gifts to Esau ahead of him. Very similar situation we see going on here. Okay, verses 21 and 22. Now David had said, Surely in vain have I kept all that this fellow hath in the wilderness, so that nothing was missed of all that pertained unto him, and he hath requited me for evil for good. So and more also do God unto the enemies of David, if I leave of all that pertain to him by the morning light, and that any that pisses against the wall. That's an interesting term. It's used a few places in the Bible. It's basically talking about men. Men are the only ones that actually can pee against a wall. I always find that kind of funny in the King James Version. So looking at this verse here and a couple of comments on it. First, a comment on verse 21. Look at Psalms 109, verse 5. And they have rewarded me evil for good and hatred for my love. So that's how Nabal is treating David out of his kindness. Also, verse 22, we're going to look at 1 Samuel 3:17. And he said, what is this thing that the Lord has said unto thee? I pray thee, hide it not from me. God did do so to thee, and more also, if thou hide anything from me of all the things that he said unto thee. This was back when Samuel was first being trained by the high priest, and the high priest was basically telling Samuel not to leave anything out, and that's what basically this was what we're seeing here in verse 22. Also 1 Kings 14:10. Dearly beloved, avenge not yourself, but rather give place unto wrath. For it is written, vengeance is mine, and I will repay, saith the Lord. I added that verse at 1 Kings 14:10. Therefore, behold, I will bring evil upon the house of Jeroboam, and will cut off from Jeroboam him that same term, pisses against the wall, and him that is shut up and left in Israel, and will take away the remnant of the house of Jeroboam, as a man taketh away dung, till it all be gone. Basically saying he's going to kill every man of Nabal's group, is what David's intent is. But as we're going to see, Abigail is going to get to him and talk to him before this happens. And we'll get to that next week. But let me leave with this thought, that when it comes to bringing vengeance against anybody, and it's very tempting, I know. You get cut off, driving, your anger just kind of erodes. I know myself, sometimes I'll even lay on the horn and let the guy know that how displeased I was with what he did. But really, we should leave it to the Lord. And dearly beloved, avenge not yourselves, but rather give place unto wrath. For it is written, vengeance is mine, I will repay, saith the Lord. And the Lord will actually take care of our enemies when the time comes. So next week we'll see how Abigail does save many. This is the time where God intercedes for David's foolishness. Because remember, the vengeance is mine, I will repay, saith the Lord. So we'll leave that today, and next week we will look how Abigail intercedes for Nabal, and David ends up marrying her. That's going to be an interesting prelude to what happens due to this story. As you can always figure out that Nabal is actually going to die during this exchange. We'll see how next week. So stay tuned. Tomorrow we'll be in Zechariah. We'll be looking at Zechariah and starting that book. And I hope you enjoy it. And so we'll see you then. Have a great day.